welcome to the podcast. When you were
Thank
coming,
you.
I was seeing if I could find a Tears of the Zelda, Tears of the Kingdom, T-shirt. I couldn't find that, and interestingly, I was talking to a friend of mine who's just said to me, like 15 minutes before I got on the podcast, that he completed 120 shrines on the ground. So he is like kicking it off, right? So for context, for folks who are listening, me and Sid, when we first met, I looked at Sid and I'm like, this looks like a gamer, and he's like, yes, I am. So he's a huge fan of the Zelda series, apart from being an engineering manager at Route. So welcome to the podcast, Sid.
Thank you. Thank you, David. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, and I think we want to stick to what this podcast is about, which is big ideas in app architecture. So we'll stick to talking about what you do at Route as part of a conversation. But I do want to talk to you about where you are in Tears of the Kingdom.
Without spoiling any fun, I'm around, I think, 135 shrines now.
You
And
135?
yes. And I've collected most of the armor sets that the game has to offer, which is kind of fun.
So
I
you
missed out on that in Breath of the Wild, but this
So
is
how
one I'm
many how
getting.
many are there in total? Because somebody told me you have 36 in the sky and about 120 on the ground, and then you have bunch of them underground as well.
Yes. They're around, I believe there are like 152 shrines in total. So
So you're pretty close to finishing the game up.
yeah, I'm kind of taking it slow because I wanted to do justice to the developers who made the game and made it look so beautiful. So I want to explore everything before I go into the arc, which actually closes the story for the game. Yeah.
Oh, I mean, you are way ahead of me because I am like right now, probably 20 shrines, 25 shrines. Like that's where I am, right? I'm way behind, and I think I'm also going to take my sweet time to complete them. But again, it's always, fun to have people who are, Zelda fans on the podcast. So you're actually one of the first ones I'm talking to. I just realized I should have asked other people about that too. But anyways, that's a weird segue. But let's jump into the podcast and kind of talk to you about what you do at Route. I know your role at Route is, engineering manager, and you lead a very important team at Route. But as we begin, for folks who are listening, why don't you help us understand, kind of level set, what does Route do, and what it brings out to the industry? Why is it important?
So Route as a company is focused on the post-purchase journey of a user. What that means is that once you actually check out a product, after that you have a seamless experience. And I'll go into the various product offerings that we have. We have protection, which is you can buy kind of an insurance on your package. So if it gets lost in transit or you have post thieves or something, you don't need to worry about it. And then the second piece of com- uh, the product is tracking. That's while the package is out, you want to track it, just kind of like an Amazon experience, but for all the other merchants as well. And that's the second product. Then the third product that we have is resolution. If your package does get lost, how do you go about getting in touch with the consumer services so that you can get that situation resolved? And the fourth part is Engage, which is a newer product that we've got coming out. And what it does is during your post purchase, that's while you check out, it recommends products to you that could either be complementary or similar to things that you already have in the cart and would make sense to you. And you can engage with those products, and we parts uh, extend that product by including it into like your email campaigns or your notification campaigns, which allows the user, the consumer of that product, options on what else is available in the market, which might align with my interests. Yeah. That's Route as such. Yeah.
That's awesome. So is it like the business is more B2B or it's B2C?
That's a good question. So I would say half of the business is B2B and the other half is B2C. So the
Yeah.
part where you purchase protection, that's kind of part of the B2B chain as well as the Engage product. And then we have tracking, which is a B2C product.
I got it.
So we have an app called Route. Do check it out. You can go into it, track all your packages would be at one place, and you'd be able to get tracking information on it. rather than you having to go check your email, going to the actual orders, like the carrier's page, and checking where it is in the journey. You can just go to the app that's got everything consolidated and check where your package is in that journey and just move on, call it a day.
Yeah, which is what I love to do. I'm like restless when I've ordered something and it hasn't come home, right? So, for example, I've like Amazon app has the tracking information, and then as soon as I see 10 stops away, I'm like excited, like, okay, I'm getting ready. So, do you guys integrate with like Amazon as well as, other, services like Shop that provide you to purchase things, but then also you can do the route tracking for them?
Yes, we do. Our main focus is Shopify and like the merchant platforms. So there's quite a few: the Shopify, BigCommerce, Magento. Then we've got Salesforce Cloud and n number of platforms where you can go and set up your merchant store. And we have app integration onto that. So you basically add the app into your store, and it'll at post purchase at checkout, it'll give you an option. Hey, like, do you want to purchase the route insurance? And so at that point, you can purchase your route insurance, and rest assured that route will handle the rest for you if something happens with the package. Yeah.
Got it. Oh, that's awesome. I mean, especially for small businesses that are running on Shopify, providing some sort of a insurance opportunity for them to protect the whatever they're sending is, I think, like a pretty interesting, value proposition. So, is that one of the biggest selling points that you have when you go after users and customers about what route offers? Like, what are the three things that you kind of tell them? Hey, use route because we do these three things.
Usually, the user as such, the consumer as such, is more interested in the tracking capability, I would say. The protect offering as such just ties into it. And if you have the protect offering on it, then we take care of the resolution if your package gets lost. But generally, anybody who installs the Route app does get the track offering as it is. So any user, you don't have to explicitly purchase route insurance, and they go through that flow, and we'll provide the tracking for you.
Got it. Yeah. And I'm just curious, maybe I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself, but when you were sharing, I was thinking, do you also have to start thinking about when you have these route, you know, stuff that you're sending to different people, packages going, do you have to think about optimizing which route the, l- I would say the companies like FedEx or other who are delivering it have to take? Do you engage with them as well in that capacity?
Yes, so we have carrier integrations which engage with them.
Nice.
Generally, we use like a sum of our own carrier integrations and third-party aggregators to go provide that tracking data to our users. Yeah.
Got it. Oh, that's brilliant. I mean, there's a lot of fun things that you're cooking. So let's dive into a little bit more about what you do at Route, right? Like, so one thing that's clear is that you are in a business that's focused on B2B and B2C, and then you enable this experience that you just shared. But what does your role entail? And expand a little bit about what you do and the team that you take care of, and different functions within it for the everyone who's listening. So yeah.
Perfect. So my team, I would say, is literally the deep backend. If there was a backend as deep as the Marina Trench, it would probably be that. So we have the team is sitting over the orders infrastructure. That's basically ingesting your packages, and post that once the package is there, what kind of notifications we want to send. That's also owned by us. In addition to integrating directly with platforms, we also allow the users to allow us to uh, uh, hook up their emails directly to us, and we parse their emails to figure out which packages are they tracking in the app. And that parsing capability, as well as connection capability, also sits with my team. And the fourth thing that we have, that's the engage product. That's the product recommendations that we make during the post-purchase checkout, or post or email campaigns, or notifications. That also sits with my team. So literally, like any product that Route has, somehow interfaces with the team's general set of responsibilities. So you could say that pretty hammered by requests on what's important, yeah, at the time. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so you and your team like sit the deep architecture, but you kind
Yeah.
of are solving a very, very critical function for the company, right?
hmm Yeah. Yeah. So the company, for us, like, this team as such is critical in its capacity to run most of the uh, business operations that would reach out to the consumer and store in the knowledge that's coming in from a B2B side, and make that connection. So we are kind of like that, I guess, like that routing box, which would get the information from the business into the to the consumer as well. And of course, the information is also used to kind of give good insights to the business as well
Business as
on
well.
how. Yeah,
So it seems like
yeah.
you're looking at data as well. So expand for me, like the different teams that you have. Like, do you have like a database team? You have an infrastructure team, a developer
Mhm.
team? Like, how does that work? I mean, for you.
The idea is that right now, how our teams are structured, most of the teams operate on an operational model that we are end to end. So that means we generally take things from development to deployment, and I would say a bit of QA also after that. And we tend to keep our deployments pipeline such that at least the obvious things get checked. And now, how our teams are such and route are structured, there's a uh, just to get something deployed, there's a lot of things involved. So we do have like a person who's in the I would say developer enablement as slash SRE slash platform engineering, who are empowering us to let us focus on actually the business use cases, and they provide the bare bones of pipelines as well as infrastructure that is required to actually make us operational into the cloud. And yeah, yeah. So that person is generally not sitting with our team. They're like its own team, and they empower us to make decisions independently so that we can move pretty quickly.
Got it. Yeah. So you have a set of folks who are saying, okay, they'll provide you what you need. They're basically bringing you the word. They are bringing you everything that you need. I mean, going back to Tears of Zelda reference, they provide all the things, but you essentially put it all together based on what your business requirement are.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Like an example would be, for example, like GitLab pipelines. So my team does not have to invest too much time into understanding GitLab pipelines and bringing that up. We do have like a bare bone structure in place, which is plugged into the application, which is minimal, but it gets you there very quickly. Then after that, if you want to append stuff to it, that's kind of the team's responsibility. As such, for example, if you want to build in like integration tests or functional tests as such, so those kind of things, they are built in by the team themselves, because each team has a different way and style of going about their testing pyramid. And Route gives you the option to kind of work against the things that you're comfortable and the choices that best reflect the ecosystem of the software that you're working with.
Yeah, and this new exciting product that you're working on, that the Engage,
Mhm.
it's basically a totally different product, different from the Route app, or is it part of the Route app itself?
The Route app itself gets the feedback from the Engage product. So if you've got packages which have recommendations against them, those are usually the merchants that have integrated with the Route ecosystem or have installed the Route app. They
Got
would carry recommendations if they're on the appropriate plan. Yeah.
Got it. Yeah. And so I'm intrigued always, right? Like whenever you start companies, right? Typically you have this one idea, or you feel like, well, I want to build something and it should look like this. So the first year of that company, first few years, they are focused on building that one service, right? But over a period, they realize, well, there are other things that we can do with it. Like, for let's say, take the classic example of Amazon, which started off as selling books, and then they expanded to do other things, and now they're selling Prime, which is video, and then they're saying, okay, we'll sell you now product. And so it's a classic example of where you start with an idea, and then you look at the market and you realize that, oh, there is a need for something else that we can actually bring. And so this Engage kind of feels like is an extension of how Route has expanded in the use cases that it's providing to the users. So tell me a little bit about, if you were involved in it, like as to what goes behind the scene as to thinking about, oh, well, we feel like we need something like Engage for our users.
Uh, Generally, the product itself was, I have to say, a brainchild of our product org as such, and we've got like an uh, amazing team looking at what merchants are wanting. So we have an ecosystem, right? There are account executives, then there are CSMs, and they're unlike engineers, they're interacting with the merchants and prospective merchants on a daily basis. And they understand that, hey, like these are the things that merchants are interested in. And these are the things that we want to, develop to keep the merchants who are with us interested in this platform itself. And that feedback is kind of funneled into our product team, and that product team kind of looks at that feedback, understands what merchants are kind of moving towards, without like hyperbolically discounting any future possibilities that the company wants to go explore. And then that feedback is kind of put on the plates of the engineer to develop features that would at least address like feedback that would help retain our merchants, which is amazing because we have like 98.1% retention at this point. And we also prepare for any enterprise merchants or big ticket merchants that want to come into the route ecosystem over the next 6 months, and if they've requested for a specific feature which is like specific to their ecosystem. So that's how we on engineering side kind of get that feedback. We funnel it through, and then after that we kind of pull together data with the data analyst team and the product team to kind of verify and justify the product capability as such. Yeah.
Right. So what you're essentially saying is that there is no bad idea that exists out there until
Yes.
you, yeah, right. Which is fascinating because I feel like folks don't realize that. Especially one of the things what you said I really like is that you're getting active feedback from customer success team and people who are talking to these users and merchants who are on the field, and that active feedback comes back into the company's tracker, and then from there you understand product requirements and capabilities. So there essentially is no bad idea. There can be a merchant who might give you this, one person might feel is the silliest idea, but then you consider that. So you're talking about that, so you got a feedback. So from that feedback I wanted to understand how you've gone through this process of talking to the data team and understanding if there is some substance to this. Okay, there is a viable product or a service or something that you can enhance in the product. How does your team get engaged after that? Like as an engineering manager, how do you get involved in the strategy for that and kind of laying out what needs to be built? So expand on that a little bit.
That's a good question. So what we've done is the feedback once it's funneled in is not only like for certain set of eyes. It's quite transparent, the mechanism. We've got like Tableau dashboards where go and check that out, and there are multiple Google Sheets that are running around to yeah that I keep like bookmarked to make sure that there's no surprises as far as product features are concerned. So it's not like a complete pivot. If we are going into a product feature, which would, if you think about it, Engage itself is kind of like a pivot from our traditional offering, which is protect, track, and resolve. It kind of fits into the build really well, where Engage kind of came into place because platforms like Shopify introduced extensibility that allows you to plug in things during their checkout flow. And yeah. So and the sheets are there, and generally we end up reviewing these on a weekly basis at least to make sure that at least the deals coming into the pipeline or the deals that we already have secured are not are kind of getting the value add that we promised them against route. So it's quite a transparent process. And like I said, our product team kind of is amazing. They kind of keep us on our toes as well on the SDMs as well. And they make sure that if they are planning on going a certain route, the SDM is generally engaged at the get-go to talk through the challenges that would be faced before we actually hit the engineering team and kind of introduce the idea to them and go into a planning phase of how we want to execute against this in a timely manner. Yeah.
Amazing. No, that's great to know. So were you always like, I'm just curious, were you always passionate about this line of work and like doing or building applications and helping build applications for companies and users? Like, let's dive into a little bit, like maybe this is the point where we go back a little bit into Sid's story as to what led you to, do what you're saying that you're doing right now.
Yeah, like I remember when I bought my first computer when I was in seventh grade. It's in India, and it was back in I think 2001 or something. And at that time, I was so surprised with this new thing. Like we had the TV, and now I can do things with the TV. For me as a child, it was quite interesting. And growing up, uh, I went into computer science because of that, because it kind of felt like I, I I could solution in a space where I was comfortable in. And yeah, that kind of led my computer science background. And then I got into companies, and I'm inherently more interested in consumer facing project products right now, rather than much more deeper, though like recent changes, like that can change. But yeah, like it's incredible when you see and develop something, and you put it out there, and then users interact with it, and they're like, hey, like, I was looking for something of this sort to be in the market, and this app does a really good job of it. So that kind of really motivates me to kind of build apps that actually drive value towards the consumer. And that's kind of the motivation behind why I like to do a lot of apps and build things that people actually use. Yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing because I mean I see a similarity, and I have another friend actually who is used to work at FedEx, and I mean every time we would try to connect with them, he had such a busy schedule for almost a year, and I would meet him, and he's like, "Dude, where are you?" And he's like, "I'm working on very something really important, all of that." So I'm like, "Okay, no problem." And then finally we meet him after a year, and he is like really excited about something. He's like, "So we finished this project." I'm like, "Great." And then we're driving together, and he sees the FedEx office, So he used to work at FedEx, and he's like, "Well, you see this new FedEx office, they have a new system right now. If you go and kind of use it, that system is what we were working on." And I was like, "Dude, that's fascinating," because like it's there is this joy that I've seen when you complete a project, but there is more joy when you see your product being used by other people. So he literally was like, "Let's go inside and go check out the system." I'm like, so we really went in and we saw the system that he was working on. And the funny thing is, while we were interacting with the system, he found a bug in it, and then he called his team and like, "Oh, seems like this thing is not coming out, or like some receipt or something like that." So it was really interesting to like see that. So to your point, right, when you build applications, there is this joy that you get that you're talking about when you build applications that folks use, and that kind of makes a difference, which is really exciting.
Yeah, that reminds me of my own anecdotes, like while I'm using the Route app myself, if something goes wrong with my parsing of emails and something, and then I raise a bug from my own phone, hey, like, guys, we need to go fix it, and then kind of transfer it into our queue, without having it to kind of go through the whole route of reproducing the bug, because as such, it's right in front of you. There's
Oh yeah.
nothing that you can, and there's no need to reproduce it. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
and I think that's the best way to like improve your own product, right? Like to use it as much as possible. I mean, I think there's this whole story of Steve Jobs, when the first iPhone was coming out, and I think they built a prototype, and then he kept the iPhone in his pocket and had the car keys and would drive around or use the phone for a certain amount of time and saw scratches on it and felt like they needed a different kind of glass that didn't have scratches on it. I think that led to the new form of the phone glass that you keep on top of the phone, so that led to the development of that. So I feel like what you're talking about is in a sense what Steve Jobs did for the iPhone, so which is pretty
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah, generally when we come to the table, like at least through my own experience, I've seen that the devil's in the detail, and like these small things which often get ignored actually make for what builds a great consumer experience. And yeah. So sometimes you're more tempted to go after the bigger fish, but sometimes it's like, hey, like this idea was so easy to implement and it drove so much value for the consumer. Those ones, like I wait for those ideas to pop up, and when we see the KPIs against it, it just blows your mind. That, oh wow, this was amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, I think great customer experience being built into the app is so critical to the overall experience of what the company is trying to drive, right? I mean, many people feel like customer experience is driven by a UI experience, right? I mean, of course, it is true that a UI experience is important, but the way it performs, the way the app is always available, how it doesn't go down, how is it able to scale? I think those are so much more important variables that many people who are developing are not thinking about, but you in engineering positions are always thinking about, hey, we need to consider all these important functions that are true early or truly important for a good customer experience, right? So from that, I wanted to segue into this question that I was meaning to ask you was, these things are important, so how do you consider that into the architecture, and how do you think about the engineering decisions that you have to take when you're choosing that tech stack for that experience?
So in Route, we have quite the consistent tech stack. We generally prefer to write backend sources in Golang. It's quite an opinionated language in itself, and which keeps the opinion of the developers on the lower side while you're reviewing code. So it minimizes the amount of ways that you should be able to do stuff compared to languages like JavaScript and Java, which in which you can do like one thing 1,000 ways, and opinions start to clash in those languages. Golang kind of reduces that for us. Now, in terms of our infrastructure, we generally choose the first choice is going with AWS. If AWS does not have the thing that we require, then we generally we look for third-party providers of that service. One of those would be, for convenience, like Databricks would be one of those services that we've chosen, and as well as CockroachDB, which is kind of like a high availability database that you all provide. So those are the major tech stack components that we have. So we default to AWS, then we have CockroachDB and Databricks for our data jobs. And as such, choice of new infrastructure is decided through a process of review, which is quite simple, I would say. In a team the size of Route, generally each team has a very senior engineer. In my team, I have a principal engineer, and so before we make a choice on moving along with a certain piece of infrastructure, for example, example being, hey, like I want to use Kafka instead of Kinesis, or I want to use Kinesis instead of SNS, then we ask like basic questions, and at least that decision and that questioning is localized into the team. That are we going to be seeing packets come in with greater than 256 KB? Do we need this? What is the additional functionality that we'd have to build to operationalize something like Kinesis? Just an example of that would be, hey, like on SNS, you can go click in the AWS console to redrive stuff. Does Kinesis provide the same kind of functionality? If it doesn't, how do we want to operationalize rerunning our queues, our topics, or how do we want to operationalize rerunning that payload on Kafka? So once those decisions are localized, like once those questions are localized, as such, we put together a proposal. We have at the highest level a technical architect, and he generally looks through the proposal to make sure that everything is sound. And and people are not getting too ambitious with their
With their
with
requirements.
their designs.
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah, yeah.
yes,
I mean,
yes.
it's important. I think, I mean, I, in my capacity at at Cockroach DB or Cockroach Labs, I work primarily with AWS, and I've really enjoyed the AWS platform and just the multifaceted solutions that they have. But not every solution really works for me and my requirements. So I think I've noticed in my conversations with other folks, even you, that sometimes not everything that they offer works as you expected, and then you go and pick something else. So but the driver for picking something else is usually a requirement that you're trying to build it out, right? A high availability system, or you need multi-region capability, or you're like, I want always on, or you're like, well, I want to scale. So you're like, well, let's use the EKS and start. And when we were talking last time, you were talking about something that you're trying to explore with EKS. Tell me a little bit more about that driver, as to what led to you thinking that we need to move to something like this, and then why are you thinking about EKS?
Um, at the moment, we use ECS, which is a great control plane. I have no complaints against it. It's quite easy to use, and we use as such Fargate profiles in the back, so we don't host it on EC2 servers. So our computer is pretty optimized when it comes to costing, and so there are a few things that the EKS domain kind of provide, and that's kind of the trend of the industry that's shifting left into security and other stuff. That gives you a more fine-grained control over your traffic, how you do your metrics, or even how you do your logs. And that's something that has at least sparked the debate in our company on looking at more simpler solutions towards that. And AWS itself is keeping up with that ecosystem by providing their own service discovery mechanisms, because one of the things that I feel folks don't realize is that you're not really uh, investing in EKS from standpoint that you stand up EKS and that's that. You're actually investing in the tooling that the Kubernetes infrastructure as such provides, which is separate from the control plane itself. And so while we invest in this, we have to be cautious about which tooling we want to go about using in that ecosystem, so as not to burden the team with exponential learning curves, which would essentially slow down our product growth. And so being specific about what things we want and what would drive the most value for us. Something like service discovery kind of drives automatic value for out of the box, or even like a Istio, like Istio itself is service discovery. Yeah, service mesh. That's amazing. Like you just stand it up, and all your metrics, all your traffic gets routed through the on-while 3L4 proxy, and that gives you metrics at even before the call hits your application. So it removes kind of work off the plate of your own team. So your own, like my own team or anybody's team, won't have to be directly involved in putting in specific sidecars in the ECS mechanism to go and scrape, get Prometheus metrics, or put a statsd sidecar to push those metrics. That's kind of controlled by the control plane itself, and you can upload something of that sort through I believe it's called a daemon thread or something in EKS, which appends that sidecar onto your already deployed application and makes it seamless on that routing mechanism. Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, so you have to think about the efficiency that a new system brings to what your existing tool is versus the effort your team has to put into it, right? Like, so
Yes.
how do you go about making that decision, right? Like, do you also have a process, or like as an engineering manager, how do you research and kind of define that? Okay, this is something really important, and we need to build a case around why we need to use it, and so how do you do that?
Mhm. Um, Generally, what I do is I take a dig at it myself first to see how bad it is.
Right.
You can say it's hey, going to ask somebody to do this in the future, right?
Yeah.
Or at least provision something of this sort. So having an understanding of the ecosystem kind of helps talk through it. And so that's how I start. I take a dig at it myself. I see how, um, up till now, this is my first time being an engineering manager. Up till now, I've been an engineer, so my problem solving framework is still the same. Hey, just learn the things that are important to you at this moment and see how quickly I can go from a 0 to at least 95. And then I say like, hey, like I was able to stand up an EKS cluster via a infrastructure as code mechanism that's like Terraform or something through my pipelines in a 3 days framework or something. And based on the experience that I've had in the industry and how quickly I've been able to stand up this, how would my own team fare against getting apps deployed into the system, and can I do something so that they are not involved at all and this process is seamless? And so I tend to kind of take some time and answer those questions and go through those internally with myself, and then I kind of talk to somebody who already has experience on those and see how their experience has gone. And AWS does, like, not only AWS, I think most of the companies who've built architecture on top of control planes like ECS or EKS, or the one I think Google's is GKS or something, and GKE, yeah. And they've written like beautiful blog posts which kind of guide you in the right direction. So you're not like the first one who's going into this problem. The ecosystem is quite established, and it might be worthwhile to gather that knowledge before you actually go ahead and fund that change. So gathering that knowledge, that what are the pain points that companies of our sizes have faced. Now, tying into your earlier question, hey, like, how many regions is our system deployed in? If our region specific, like our business is more specific to North America, or then we would kind of keep most of our compute inside of North America, US East 1 or US West 2. And we are not in the place where we are deploying across regions where we've got like in Singapore or Japan or even in Germany. We are focused on, yeah. And so we can kind of focus our knowledge building on top of companies who've already faced these challenges, and there are enough startups kind of adopting this technology that they've written enough, and there's enough knowledge floating around to guide us into a direction on the early challenges that we might face while interfacing with this technology and while we are adopting this technology. So generally, my idea is to kind of gather that information, form a framework of, hey, like, these are the problems that we are going to face. And yeah, and then we kind of delve into that discussion where, hey, like, how would this create value for the company? And that's kind of the framework I asked my team as well to use. And to be honest, like, they are the ones who kind of influence this framework into me. This is something that I train the newer people who join the team into. Yeah.
That's brilliant. I mean, so there is also like this feedback mechanism where once you've kind of assessed something, you go to your developer teams or development teams, and they kind of give you feedback on what they feel about it. And there's this collaborative process of decision making, right? So that's pretty interesting. One of the thoughts I had when you were saying was like, especially around Kubernetes, like it's a brilliant project that came out of Google, right? The ability that it gave to enterprises to, like, of course, not just containerize, use containers, but kind of scale things out in a pretty good fashion. And for where route is right now, it definitely feels like is a great, thought leadership fundamental to think about scale in everything that you're building, right? So from that, I wanted to go back to uh, a question around in AWS itself, and the journey to the cloud, right? Was Route always from the very beginning like a start on cloud kind of company, or was it like they had their own data centers and then they moved to the cloud? Like, tell me a little bit about the cloud journey and or how it all began, if you know that.
Yeah. Route is a fairly new company. We've been in operations around 4.5 years now. And this is company kind of came out a little bit pre-COVID. And you can see why COVID would boom the route business, because basically folks are ordering packages at home. And that means there are more thefts of packages, and the protect, track, resolve kind of worked really well. and it kind of made the business use case for the company itself. So we came through that. So it's fairly young, and AWS by that time, I think it was fairly, I would say, mature ecosystem. So Route has always been on AWS, and Route from the get-go adopted GitLab as their hosting platform, and GitLab provides pipelines inherent native to their platform, which played into the philosophy of having software deployed like multiple times a day rather than just the once. In the beginning, I believe and this is before me, but I'm still owning some of that infrastructure, so I can talk about it. So in the beginning, I think the deployment mechanism was more manual, but as the teams kind of grew, it was great that the leaders invested in developer enablement as well as site reliability engineering teams that allowed for us to reach a place where by the time I joined, I think in a couple of months only from the time I joined, we were in a continuous integration mode. That's when the only time we have to click a button is when we deploy to prod. And so it was a fairly good mechanism. So we were deploying at, say, a velocity of like at least four or five deployments, big deployments a week, and then smaller deployments is going through the whole day.
Right, right. Oh, that's interesting because I think my whole experience too on AWS was initially like I would get those free credits, like $300 of credits, and start using it, and then I started loving the fact that pretty much everything I need is available there. But then again, I reached a point where I needed to like figure out if I have to build so much infrastructure, I have to build route tables, and I have to put the security groups and everything. I can't do this manually, so I started using Terraform, and I'm like a huge Terraform advocate. I feel like it's pretty good infrastructure as a code solution that works in multiple environments, obviously, but really helps me map out how I want to put my infrastructure together. So that maturity and building that into a company, especially, is really critical. I feel as you try to scale.
Yeah, and there's been a lot of conversation around it, around the operating models of teams on how you can deliver product really quickly. And I, I don't know if you read this. There's this book that came out, I think, in 2019. It's called Accelerate, and it basically talks about it's a fact an analysis of what a high performing team is, and one of the things that they noticed as a metric of high performing team is how quickly are your deploys getting into in front of the customer. And because right now the market that we are in, you're running against time because everybody has access to the technology that you have access to. So if you're thinking of if you have just started kind of a unique space which routed like the package protection, then the competitors are going to show up sooner or later. And how can we keep ourselves at the I would say the cutting edge of our offering to them so that merchants don't churn away to other folks is by keeping our technology stack in a manner that allows us to innovate much more quickly and be ahead of the game. So yeah, that your comment around like infrastructure as code kind of started that
Chain of thought in your mind.
thought. Yes,
Yeah, yeah.
change of
No,
thought,
I dig
and
it.
yeah.
Yeah. So I was gonna say when you were saying, right, like, I mean, it's so critical for whatever your teams are building, for it to have feedback right from users, right? I've seen engineering teams that go back and have this brilliant idea, and they work on that idea for almost an year. Sometimes it takes 18 months. They're making changes, and eventually it goes into production, and then it's a dud in the sense like they've got the feedback so late by the time things have moved on. And in today's day and age, when people want quick experience, quick feedback, everything has to move quickly. Having things planned out in microservices infrastructure kind of really helps out. And I think that allows you to like look at everything that you're building in silo and kind of get feedbacks quickly. So it seems like you have that kind of an approach at Route.
Mhm. Yeah, like whenever what we tend to do at Route during product deployments is once we've deployed the product, we definitely track the success KPIs
Right.
behind it. And sometimes things work out, sometimes things don't. And sometimes the product is adopted really quickly, and sometimes there are challenges that are not essentially with the technology, but by how the technology is communicated to people for whom the value would be created. For example, like chat gpt itself, um, it probably creates a lot of value for me and you, being in the tech sector, but for a plumber, I don't think it would create that much value. So trying to sell a technology solution which probably utilizes AI to make their work easier would be harder. Things like uh, like Shopify merchant stores or Magento merchant stores, their issue is that most of the sales channels are right now quite saturated. Um, if you go on to Amazon or other places, like you type something, it's not the small businesses, small or mid-segment businesses that come up in those results. It's mostly the bigger players that surface up in those results. So we want to create like an opportunity for the merchant to be able to interact with their audience, as well as to re-engage them and bring them back into the ecosystem. This comes through like a mechanism of feedback where we say, hey, we've got post-purchase recommendations, and not only that, we've also got recommendations through your campaigns that will allow your user to explore other offerings that you have as a merchant. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. I think that's the from for where you are as a startup, and where I feel a lot of folks have to, certain risks are important. You have to go after certain things that you believe in, that can enhance your overall portfolio. And I think what Route kind of offers is this very whole 360 experience for a merchant, where one stop shop, where you have everything that is always available, and is providing you with the best information that they can you know take or look at to provide good experience to their users, who are eventually buying their products. So I think it's good, and I'm super glad that we have companies like Route that exist, and engineering managers and engineering teams who are trying to solve these problems, such as you. So it's brilliant. uh, I wanted to ask you this just out of curiosity. I mean, usually I don't go into cockroach related stuff or cockroach db stuff, but I wanted to ask you, you have an infrastructure designed right now where you basically operate within the US. So you have US East 1, US West 2. Those are your two territories. What led you to like pick CockroachDB?
Um, the decision predates me. So our CTO, the previous CTO, he was coming from Qualtrics. Cockroach was quite successful. It has been, I don't know if they're still adopting it, but yeah, was quite successfully adopted into Qualtrics. And when he came in here, they had to make a choice on the database where the orders would be stored. So, orders are right now the crux of everything. Yeah. That's the bread and butter. Like if that goes down, we're not in a good spot. So, and he, in those early phases of the company, the general idea is how can I adopt something which does not require my developers to spend a considerable amount of time on learning. And Cockroach, with its easy to use SQL interface, uh, kind of fit that bill. That hey, like we've got distributed compute, we've got relational matching in here, and we've got a language that most of the engineers know. And so let's kind of put ourselves in a position which will allow us to scale for the loads that we are going to see. And right now, like I remember, like my current, my manager, he told me that at one time he had dropped like 11 million rows, 1.8 million rows, yeah, from Cockroach, and this was in the early days. And compare and contrast, now we have 12.1 terabytes sitting inside of Cockroach cluster. All right, so yeah, that's that. Whoever made that choice kind of understood that Cockroach kind of provides a mechanism for you to scale where the um, you know without having to really affect the team's velocity while the adoption is going on. So I feel like that's the biggest, I feel like the biggest selling point for at least Cockroach for me is, yeah, it allows you to use a friendly um, language, which everybody, like people out of school, people are taught relational databases on in school, and they're like, this is SQL. So when they come into a job, it's not like, hey, like this is MongoDB, this got a separate query system, and then this is DynamoDB, this got a separate thing, and yeah, so it's relatively easier to just adopt this technology rather than having to spend too much time. Yeah.
No, I love that too. I mean, I've been interesting that you brought up the the fundamental idea of SQL being the language to talk to data, because it's still getting taught in universities and everybody's still so I mean, I know there are different databases that have gone different directions with how they want folks to interact with, but with distributed systems and having that layer of SQL, I feel is amazing because it allows you to do pretty much everything that you're used to doing, but now at a distributed scale. The other thing I was just fascinated by what you just said was, for you the most critical system is orders, right? And orders have to be rarely consistent, because if you have to show those orders out to different people or merchants, right, it has to be strongly consistent, and I think across multiple regions it's very valuable. So it's great that we see value of the product being used in that way at route as well. So it's amazing. So yeah, I mean, I know we're almost hitting our limit. Or the way I see this is, usually this is one of the first conversations, and we have so much to unravel. But usually an hour is like great for a beginning. So I wanted to ask you another question as we kind of close things out. Working as an engineering manager, what else do you do? Like, to how do you kind of stay on top of what's happening in technology, as well as focus on uh, you know playing Zelda and keeping up with all the 120, 130 shrines that you have to unlock? How do you do that? So, how do you manage all of that?
Um, Around 5 years ago, I was pretty overwhelmed with what's happening in technology. It's just too hard to keep up, you know. Like there's so many
Yeah.
things coming left, right, and center. And so I had to kind of identify, how do I want to start learning about things? And do I want to focus on only one thing, or do I want to focus on everything? And so after like a little bit of soul searching, what I started doing was I started reading research papers, and this is how I learned. I started reading research papers, and when I read a research paper the first time, it took me at least a month to understand what did this person say. So it was a very heavy literature, you know, and so I kept doing that, uh, and eventually I reached a point where difficult concepts became easier to understand, and that time period started shrinking for me. And now I'm at a point where I can look at documentation, and just because my basics, like distributed systems and everything, are pretty flushed out thanks to all those research papers. um, so it's easier for me to, I would say, grab on to concepts quickly, and I don't have to spend like a large amount of time trying to understand it, because I feel like there's a lot of solutions in the market, and understanding the value benefit of each of them much more quickly would help you kind of execute on things that would make would drive value for yourself. And an example would be, hey, like trunk based development is quite the industry standard right now, but there's still products out there which work on feature based development, feature branch based development. So I probably want to focus more on products that are trunk based rather than on feature branch based, because that introduces a lot of complexity. So that initial process that I followed, that hey, like let me read about hard things so that I can get my basics straight. And when I got through that, and I also realized that I need not practice everything. I just need to practice things that drive value for me. And then I practice those, and now I'm at a place where it allows me to take decisions quickly, kind of bring up if I want to, uh, try out something new. Then I'm not. I would say I don't have like that feeling that, oh shit, like I'm going to fail. All right, at this point. because it's so tough. Now I'm at a point where I'm like, something's going to happen. I know what's going to happen, but whatever happens, I'm going to be able to deal with it. Yeah, so that's kind of the mindset that I've evolved to.
I was going to ask you a question after this, like your advice to folks, like, but you kind of alluded to what your recommendation is for people, right? Like one of the things is like the fundamental idea, like, see, go read research papers, right? Like, and I also had this fear, right? Like, and it's always intimidating to go read a dissertation or a, research paper that somebody has written. They've spent 3 years onto it, and then you're trying to digest and understand it, and it feels a little intimidating, and you have imposter syndrome sometimes, which I have all the time, but so there is a lot of humility in what you said, that hey, go read something, and it might be complex for you in the beginning, but as you do something more, it's like it'll get better, and towards the end it's just going to benefit you and the teams that you work with.
Yeah, like the mind itself is a muscle. You exercise it, it'll become better and better. Just like the body. And it, I got into the habit of just exercising it a little bit from time to time. And generally, like now that you asked for the advice, like it's not only important, like at least in the modern industry, it's not only important that you are technically sound, but it's um, even more critical that you're able to communicate that in a fashion that is digestible by other folks. And this is where kind of Richard Feynman's uh, philosophy of learning kind of plays into that. If you're not able to explain something to another person in a period of 2 minutes, then probably you've not understood it well enough yourself. And it might be time to kind of go back, see, and understand it a little bit better, so that you can explain that thing to a layman in a period of 2 minutes, and they're able to ask questions on that 2 minute statement that you made to them. And that's kind of been my litmus test. I'm sorry to say, my wife's been my guinea pig, and for the
Which
longest
wife
time.
is not? Like, I always
Yes.
go bounce my ideas with my wife, and she's like, I don't get it, man. So yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, but what you said is words to live by, right? Like if you can't
Correct.
explain something to somebody in 2 minutes, I mean, there's an art to pitching. There's an art to being able to articulate ideas, and especially in positions where you are, you have to come up with, you have to digest so much information and be able to like bring it in front of people and say, okay, this is what this helps us do, and kind of summarize all of that. So that's,
Mhm.
I feel, is a great advice and words to live by, so
Yeah. Yeah.
amazing. Siddharth, I
Cool.
mean, Siddhartha, or Sid, and a fellow Tears of the Kingdom player, I would say it's been an absolute pleasure to have you here, on the podcast, and it's been a great conversation,
Thank
and I'm gonna let you go and help you finish up all those shrines that you're finishing up and that you need to find. So,
Thank you so much, David. This was a good talk. Yeah, I had fun.